probably start thinking about kicking off. We've got quite a few people have joined, and we can just let people in as we go. Otherwise, is that all right with you, Andrew?
Yep, that was a bit like waiting for people to arrive at a party,
I
wasn't
know,
it? Just sitting
I
there going,
know.
hope you turn up.
And I always feel like we should have some sort of hold music playing while people join. So that's something we need to work out. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on our Legal Live today, which is about sustainability strategy. For those of you who haven't joined us before, our Legal Lives are bite-sized 30-minute webinars, interactive with questions and answers on very practical topics, hopefully to give you some takeaways while you eat your sandwiches. We are joined today, I'm delighted to say, by Andrew McGowan, who is one of the legal directors, fractional GCs. If you don't know us at the Legal Director, we provide senior, part-time, in-house and flexible resource or fractional GCs into both SME businesses and into in-house teams to support the business at whatever stage they are at. Andrew McGowan is the former GC of ASOS, where he had responsibility for ESG. It wasn't known as ESG then, was it, Andrew? But effectively, that's what it was. And also was the Director of Sustainability at Berry Brothers and Rudd. Andrew feels that that sustainability is the natural territory of the GC because it's first and foremost about risk management. And so that is the lens through which we're going to discuss it today. So just a little bit of explanation of how we're going to do this. We're going to do it in a very informal conversational format, and we're going to take questions at the end. So please, when we get there, use the Q&A function or use the raise your hand button and we'll take you off mute and you can ask your question. Towards the end, we'll share a feedback form via Teams in the chat. So please engage with the feedback form. Let us know what we did well and what we didn't do so well and what you'd like to see again in the future. And we will be following up with the full deck to your emails. It will also be on the website, the TLD website, along with the recording. So, Andrew, I think you're going to talk to us about your 3 keys.
Sure, yeah. I'm not a big slides person, even though I've got one sitting here. So I will just quickly this would be the only slide I'll use whilst we're talking here. There will be summary ones that I'll send out to everybody afterwards, but just to quickly run through what we're going to do, we'll have a quick chat about why set a sustainability strategy in the first place. In particular, I'm going to talk about why frame this as risk management, which is how I see it, and move on from that to talk about credibility, which is really the key thing to me behind setting a sustainability strategy. The 3 keys we'll look at then are zooming out, number 1. So what does a helicopter view of the business look like? Why we're using that to avoid some black spots. We'll talk about key number 2, which is prioritizing, and in particular why that's important, why that and how we can do that and how you can help your business or your clients carry out that prioritization exercise and avoid distractions and pet projects. And finally, we'll talk about being brave. In particular, I do think that saying no is crucial in this topic. So we'll talk about why that is, and we'll look at what does brave prioritization look like in practice. So that's the general gist for the next 20 minutes or so, if that's all right. At that point, I think I'll stop sharing, Sarah, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you. So Andrew, before we dive into your 3 keys, which all sound very practical to me, I think sustainability can mean different things to different people. So I think it'd be interesting to understand how you personally define it and why you think it's such a priority for businesses right now.
The definition for me, obviously, terminology in this area has been bandied around, as you say. There's acronyms have changed and whatnot. To me, this is about being a responsible business that is safeguarding their own future, and that's how I ended up looking in this. To me, it was a natural extension of my role as a general counsel, which was to be looking across the broadest horizons that were out there and trying to find the things that as a business that we weren't thinking about enough, but that could come over the hill and hit us. So it was always part of that risk management element to me. I was looking out and seeing the risks of a resource-constrained world where we run out of the stuff that we need, or we burn through people and we don't have the talent that we need to be able to do that. And that's sitting alongside as well a reputational risk that comes along with getting involved in this area, being seen as a greenwasher. So this was very much the kind of area that I should have been working in, given that my job, I always thought, was to help my business go faster, further, for longer, be more robust, be more sustainable, just in an enduring phase going forward throughout that.
Now that makes sense. And you talked about reputational risk, and obviously no business wants to be accused of greenwashing. So what do you think it takes to build a sustainability strategy that's credible, that doesn't allow for any suggestion of greenwashing?
Yeah, I mean, and that to me is, if there's one word I want everyone to keep in their head when they're doing this exercise, either by themselves or they're working with their own in-house legal team or their outside people, is about that credibility point. Where people get into trouble is where they built something that hasn't got a solid platform to stand on. That platform to me is about making a real difference to the impacts that your business has, whether on people or on the planet. So it's making that biggest difference you possibly can. I think if you're not prepared to commit to doing that, to be honest, I think it's better to actually be honest about that and say you're not going to do it rather than produce greenwash. We're beginning to see some of that in certain areas where oil companies are rolling back on, saying that they're going to become green. There's obviously a lot of debate around DEI at the minute as well. Being honest about that at least allows you to sit there. It allows the people who are trying to do this properly to stand out. So, I actually think that honesty bit, it's better to stand there and say this is what we believe than try and pretend to be something. But really, credibility to me in this stems from the big challenge of, right, how do we make the biggest difference we can to the impacts that our business has?
I really like that way of looking at it, because I think it can feel really overwhelming. And I think that kind of framing it as what's the biggest difference that we as this specific business can make, I think that's a really helpful way of looking at it. So I think that probably neatly segues into your key number one, which is zoom out.
Sure, exactly. And I mean, these keys came from, I approach this in the same way I approach a lot of the things I do, including my legal work, which is, right, okay, how can we keep this as simple as possible? A lot of people will tell you that this area is complex. There's a lot of things that fall within the umbrella of it. So it is very easy to make it complex. And complexity is kind of seductive. Clever people like dealing with it because it makes them feel good at the end of it. And there's a natural sort of reaction that thinks, oh, this is a big project, this is a big thing, it must be difficult. I tend to try and fight against that instinctively. I always think that's, I find complexity distracting and it can just take over. So I'm usually trying to go, how can I cut through this? And this is an area where, I do think simplicity works just as well. And that's what these keys came from. It came from me doing this within the business that I'm in. The first one that you mentioned, though, is sort of like, let's zoom out. I mean, it's almost counterintuitive, this one, when you think, right, okay, I need to get involved in this area. I am wanting to manage the risk in this area. Immediate instinct can often be to actually go, right, okay, my business is different to everybody else's. And we're a smart bunch of people. So you take an inside out view, you sit there and go, we're capable of working this out for ourselves. And you get everyone together and you go, right, what's the things that we can find that's in front of us? There's a couple of issues I have with that, really. The first one is, okay, yeah, you are smart people around a room. You may find the right answer by looking outside, but it's more likely you're not going to hit on exactly the right thing straight out the bat just by doing that exercise. But the bigger piece is, yes, your business is unique, but it exists within a wider industry. And that industry will have very specific dynamics that apply to all of the businesses that are within that. And if you come back to credibility and if you come back to trying to make the biggest difference you can, that biggest difference will almost always lie within those bigger industry dynamics, the inflection points that are within that, the biggest things that go towards that. So that's, to me, is what's essential, to come back out and have that, take a helicopter view of your business, look at it from the top down, have that outside in view of what you're doing, in order to be able to, sit there and look at what you're doing. So, that's what I'm wanting to do, is come back up out of this, have a look at your business from the top down. That allows you to find those bigger points that are sitting around there, okay? And a couple of tips in terms of how to do that, really, which I suppose is the most important bit. The first of which would be, don't jump into the detail. It's very tempting within this to jump into the detail, to try and find, I need specific solutions and actions straight away. Yes, you do ultimately need specific actions and things to do. But if you come back to this credibility piece, it's actually thinking that is the most important bit in this topic that I found. So don't jump in straight away. Do give yourself the time to have done the thinking about it, okay? Then come back out and, as I say, take that helicopter view, but break your business into building blocks. That's the key bit that I found when we're doing this. You can keep it fairly simple. You don't need to overcomplicate this, but you come up and you look at your business in a bunch of building blocks from tip to tail, not just the bits that you're controlling. You have to count your entire supply chain in this. But as I say, keep it relatively simple. Because we're looking at this from top down, because we're looking for big inflection points, you don't necessarily need to overcomplicate this. So if you give an example from my past, which is, Barry Bros and Rudd, they're a fine wine and spirit merchant. If you're a wine merchant, your building blocks are broadly go off, we grow the grapes, we produce the wine from that, we transport it somewhere, we store it for a long time, it's sold, it's delivered to the people, they drink it, and then there's stuff left behind afterwards. So that's 7-8 blocks. It's very high level, but what that does give you is 7-8 areas to just sit and look at and go, right, okay, what are the impacts that come out from that area? With those building blocks, you will be able to sit there and go, right, what are all of the impacts that come from that? And what we will do and send you as part of the slides is that we've got this here. I'm very old school, me. Look at this in print out, which has in 3 broad areas the kind of impacts that you need to look for. So they'll be under the resources that are being used, because we can only ever be as good as the stuff that we start with. Their impacts under what's left behind, because no such thing is thrown away really anymore. And the people are involved, because how we treat the people is who we really are. But with those building blocks and some prompts on what to think about in terms of impacts under each of those, that helicopter view will give you the broad view of your business that you need in order to be able to identify those inflection points, rather than getting stuck in and jumping into detail and immediate specific actions that are likely to miss the mark.
I can see how that would happen, the kind of jumping into solutionizing. So it sounds like you've done this exercise with a few clients. Can you share what typical kind of patterns or blind spots you could expect to emerge, working with the leadership team, trying to, take that really zoomed out helicopter view?
I mean, probably the counterintuitive part of this process is actually to stop, is to do it quite quickly. Again, it feels like, right, this is difficult. I need to think really quite deeply about it. But actually, I'm a big proponent of thinking about this quite quickly. We're looking for the big stuff. We're looking for the big stuff here. It should leap out to some extent. So I'm actually usually going, right, go through these blocks quite fast, do them in small groups, just quickly throw down the things you can see. You don't need to capture everything. If something, there may be other impacts, but if they're not leaping front of mind, they're unlikely, when we do the next prioritization exercise, they're unlikely to filter to the top of that exercise anyway. So it really is, it's trying to encourage people that, okay, this is more simple than it might appear, in order to get your hands around your priorities. So yeah, and a lot of the time that sounds quite counterintuitive for what is an important topic that has got lots of bits to it, where there's lots of people telling it's quite complicated.
I think that'll be a relief to a lot of people to hear, who think it's quite overwhelming and intimidating as a subject, to hear that keep it simple. And then so once you've kind of broken down your impacts and kept it zoomed out, your key number 2 is to prioritize. So how do you go about doing that? What's the discipline or the mindset that you need as a leadership team to do that exercise?
I mean, the starting point has to be that you just recognizing you cannot do everything at once. I mean, I've seen this quite a lot where, all of these topics are important and they've got advocates for them. And you go, I've got to do all of these. And quite simply, you can't. If you try and do everything at once, you will end up achieving nothing. You'll also look like you haven't really thought about it. And again, that's the core to the credibility of this. You're going, I have done a thinking exercise and this is what you're saying. So that's why to me, you have to prioritize on this if you're to actually be achieving and making a difference on the ground on that. And, that feels counterintuitive. This is an area somehow where people feel like they have to do everything, even though in any other business challenge that they have, you'd be instinctively prioritizing. You wouldn't be trying to kid yourself that you can do everything. There seems to be an area everyone feels like they have to. So, I mean, let me delve a bit deeper in terms of then how to do that, really, some of the keys that I've used to help with the prioritization exercise. The first of which is your priorities are very likely to be the hardest ones. I know that sounds a bit obvious, but it will be, but that's fine. You're looking for the things that make the biggest difference. That generally does come with the stuff that's the hardest to do. There's no point sticking your fingers in your ears and covering your eyes and going, I don't want to see that. That's too difficult to do. I'm going to ignore that. So do not fall for the simple ones. There will be simple ones in front of you going, well, I can do that. I'd much rather go, right, if there's a big challenge there, don't ignore the elephant in the room. Recognize it, grab it, be honest about it. But because that again is where the big difference comes from. It's where credibility comes from. So yeah, recognize the elephant in the room first and foremost. Second bit is it will relate directly to your business. And again, that sounds a little obvious, but I've seen plenty of instances where that doesn't happen. So don't, for example, get distracted by pet projects. Person A over there, who's very senior, likes this. We better go and do person A's very senior thing over there. The one that keeps getting my goat up is, for example, bees. Lots of business talking about bees. Action on bees really should only be a focus for honey makers. If you're any other kind of business, yeah, it's nice, it's good, but it shouldn't be one of your priorities. Go and do it if you want, but don't be talking about it. It's not going to be your big focus. It's not where you make the big difference. So, do not get distracted by pet projects. Look at what directly relates to the business that you've got. And then keep yourself to 3 or 4 max. So really, how you do that, you've looked at your building blocks, you'll have a bunch of things written down. You should see things that start to leap out. The thing that's appearing across all 8 building blocks, or 7 of the 8, or something like that. Or something you look at and go, that's just so big and critical to what we're doing, that leaps out. And that's why there's actually a key check by which you can do on this, which is your priorities should feel intuitively right. Every time I've done this with businesses, what we've ended up with, the second you've stood back and read it out, you go, well, duh, of course it should be that. And I'll use Berry Brothers as another example. For wine and spirits, it's really about how are the grapes grown. It's about the bottles that the wine's in, because they're heavy and they need loads of power to make them, but they're also in every single product. And it's how the stuff's moved around the world, because it comes from all corners of the globe. I'll use fast fashion as another example from my past. Again, with that one, it's about what the clothes are made from. It's about how they're made, including the workers' conditions, and it's what happens once someone's finished wearing them. Those are 3. They feel intuitively right as priorities. So it's that bit of, when you've got your 3 and you step back and go, it still doesn't really feel like the kind of business that we are when I'm taking that top-down view of it, I suggest you haven't quite hit on what are the biggest things yet.
Yeah, and you're maybe not bees.
Maybe not bees. And look, that's what I say. I do like bees. They're very, very important. There are big things to do with bees. And I'm not saying do them if you want. In fact, great, do them. But don't. They shouldn't be what you're talking about. They shouldn't be front and center, because that is not where credibility will come. They're not where a big difference will come.
So how do you deal with? And I can see how those kinds of pet projects can be an easy distraction. How do you, as GC, how do you deal with that and bring the focus back to the most impactful things?
In the past, I've dealt with that by actually creating different teams. So for the big priorities that we've got, which generally will sit in the very heart of the kind of business that you are, the operations type stuff, we'll have a very senior team. There'll be a senior team of people from the core areas on there on that. These other things that, as I say, in an ideal world, do everything, but pick different teams to do different things.
Yeah.
So where we've had stuff, you go, like, we also want to do this over here. Right, great, good. Let's have a different group of people that are looking at that. But make no bones about it, it's these central 3 things that are stuff that our strategy will live or die on, or whether we're seen as credible or whether we're seen as greenwashing. So it's very much a dividing up who's in charge of what, but maintaining that focus at all times on what we talk about, where we put the resources first and foremost, is into the priorities that we see there.
Okay, and I guess that once you've identified those things, you referred to them as not being seduced by the easy wins and kind of tackling the elephant in the room, and that probably brings us on to your third key, which is to be brave. And is that
Yeah.
to tackle the elephant in the room?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's, and it builds off the sort of bit I said before, where there's lots of bits to this, and all of them are important. But it's really, having got your priorities, it's really important to stick to them. Okay, that sounds obvious enough. But a big one for me that I don't see enough of is people coming out and going, no, I don't do these other things, therefore. And again, that to me that's what businesses do on other big chunky projects. They go, right, I'm focusing on this. A strategy has got things you don't do. That needs to be a part of this, but it's not very often I hear a business willing to stand up and go, that is an important topic, but it's not the most important thing for me. And yet that, to me, is absolutely crucial. Just because a topic is important doesn't mean it's right for your business. And instead, if you stick to the things that you've worked out are the biggest things for your business because of the industry that it's in, first of all, you don't get distracted from making the biggest difference that you can. But secondly, it's much harder for anyone to therefore argue that you haven't thought about what you're doing and that you're not committed to what you're doing. They might not agree with your priorities. They might want you to still do the thing that they like the most.
Yeah.
But your willingness to stand up there and go, look, I hear you. It is important, but I know my business. I've worked out what the big things are, and I'm going to stand behind those. And look, when I get these done, great, I'll come over here and do this. Yeah, we'll do a little bit we can. But, and it's staying focused on the priorities. What I also like that is those other things will be somebody else's priorities somewhere. There would, as I say, bees do have their place in honey businesses. That's, a few others, I'm sure, flowers. Let's go with that. They will be someone else's priorities. So you don't, you have to do the stuff that is directly relevant to you. That is the main things that your business does. If everyone's doing this, everything will end up being covered.
Yeah.
But we'll make the most progress we can, the fastest, if that makes sense. So, it very much, that saying no bit, having the confidence to stand up there and say, in our thought processes, this is what we've worked out is most important, and therefore we are not going to do these things, is absolutely crucial for that credibility piece. It's crucial to make the biggest difference that you can. And I say that to me is just the way, that's a natural business approach to me, and that's why I'm surprised I don't see as much in this area.
Yeah, that is so helpful. That's really helpful to understand your three keys, and I think they make a difficult topic feel much more doable. So thank you. And I'm also interested to hear about why you think this is the purview of the GC, of the in-house lawyer, because you see sustainability, ESG being owned in all kinds of different parts of the business. I've seen it being owned by the chief people officer. It really varies. So tell me a bit about why you think it's the domain of the GC.
There's two particular things that I felt have helped with this. One is, we've talked about prioritization as being a key thing. Lawyers are trained to step back and work out, right, what's the important things from within this massive data or all of the various arguments that are going on here. That ability to stand back, analyze, work out what's important, to me fits the mindset that GCs have just from the training that they've got and the way they approach everything else. So I actually think the way they should think suits the dispassionate analysis that's needed here. I think generally you also are used to having that backbone of being able to go, right, let's say no to this, let's stay committed to these things that are here. And then the final bit would be just that, as I say, this is risk management to me. There's lots of, there are lots of different reasons to do this. Plenty of people are very committed to going, and the environmental is hugely important, and I agree with that as well. But within the business, from a business perspective, the driver for me is that risk management piece. It's helping make sure that the business that I'm working with is able to access what it needs for a long-term future. So, that it's that bit of it, that's what falls well under this. Now, obviously, the topics touch on a variety of different areas, and that's probably another actual element. We are very used to, as lawyers, working across lots and lots of different areas across the business. We're one of the few that do have all of those touch points. You will need that, and you'll need the ability to influence people that, in the same way that we have to on the other legal topics that we cover. So, that's why, to me, it felt like it didn't feel like I was pushing the boat out by getting involved in it. It felt wrong not to be getting involved in it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so for any of our kind of audience who are, whether they're in-house lawyers or other business people who are looking to start to influence the agenda on sustainability within their business, what's a practical takeaway that you can give them before we go to questions?
In terms of how to sort of kickstart the project or get people else, get other people involved. I mean, I do think that risk management lens is a good way to get more people involved. Risk management goes on across businesses for good reason, as a matter of course. You know, managing risk is a core part alongside the reward piece. That as a lens or a framework from which to take this forward is I find is a much more productive way than trying to get into the argument of let's convince everyone that we need to save the planet.
Yeah.
Where you will end up in just, you end up then in quite subjective personal views and arguments about that. Bringing this back to, this is about risk management. This is about just making sure that we are more likely and better able to cope with and thrive within a changing world. That's the sort of stuff that resonates with people, because that's what is going on across businesses in all of the areas. So actually bringing it as that aspect of, right, let's work out how we're impacted by, as I say, resources starting to run out. How can we better protect ourselves against these risks that are coming up here? How can we make sure we're not making them worse? That is a thought process I've found resonates much better within businesses than trying to get out there and encourage everyone to, I was going to use the phrase save the whales. That's terrible, but it illustrates my point, I suppose, as a phrase.
To make it into a business imperative.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's so helpful. We've already got some questions in the chat. So Funke is asking, do you see these principles as being applicable across all industries, i.e. outside of fashion?
To be honest, yes, I do. I mean, I've taken advantage of the fact that lawyers are paid for how they think, not what they know, and I've worked in lots and lots of different businesses and lots of different industries. It's those principles of standing back, taking a helicopter view, so that you're, of the building blocks of your business, working at looking at the impacts that come from those building blocks and then prioritizing them and saying no, absolutely applies across the piece. The answer will be different in each case. That's good. But that bit of come back out, find your 3 priorities that really make a difference and stand resolutely behind those. If every business did that in every industry, that's actually my biggest positive. That would make the biggest difference to ensure that we all have, a long-term enduring future, and that we're able to keep doing all the wonderful things we want to do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think there's something else. Funke's saying thank you. Have we got any more questions from the audience? Whether that is with hands up, or you can stick them in the chat, or they're in the Q&A. Or has Andrew done such a sterling job of solving this difficult topic that no one's got any more questions to ask?
Well, they're missing subtitles. We haven't got, AI is clever, but it hasn't worked out Northern Irish subtitles yet.
I'd love to see the transcript. That'd be a great test. Brilliant. Well, look, we've wrapped up right on time. I'd like to say thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and thank you to Andrew for a really, really practical and helpful session. That was brilliant. Look out for the slides in your emails, and Sarah has just very kindly shared the feedback form in the Teams chat. So we do really appreciate any feedback that people give us. It helps us to put on really practical sessions that hopefully can help you in the future. So please do fill that out. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks very much.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.